We're going to talk about what has happened in Ukraine on this day of the Russian invasion. We'll examine the actions and the strategies, both military and political. Now, if this is your first time watching, my name is Darren Gertis. I'm a professor who's built multiple leadership programs at Charleston Southern University. So we'll also view these events through the lens of leadership. And I also wrote a book about Zelensky called I Need Ammunition, Not a Ride, and you can find it on Amazon.
Okay, so it is Friday, July 8th, and here's what's going on in Ukraine. So I'm going to skip the president of Ukraine's remarks yesterday because we have a lot of ground to cover. Boris Johnson just submitted his resignation as the British Prime Minister, but it's interesting how involved Boris Johnson was in Ukraine and what a I mean, like he was clearly the leader of the West supporting Zelensky. It wasn't Biden. He was the first on the ground in Kiev after the Russian army was removed, pushed back, evacuated is what they say, but really they got pushed out. Um, Okay, 90 minutes. This is a Reuters article. 90 minutes after resigning as a British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson called Zelensky and he told him, "You're a hero, Vladimir," according to an aide who was listening to the call. And in this country, everyone loves you was apparently. I'm not sure if he said that to Zelensky or vice versa, but he's got like a 90% approval rating in Ukraine. So I'm sure it works the other way as well. Until that last call, Johnson had spoken to Zelensky 21 times over the course of the war, essentially every 6 days. And Zelensky would just start out with a shopping list. Hey, I need this and I need that and I need the other thing. And Johnson was the guy that was helping him get there. So it's a big loss for the Ukrainians. Okay, I have a lot of RT and a number of Pravda articles in here as well. So, and I urge you to look at TASS, TASS, that's Russian website, so you can get their perspective. I want you to read Western stuff, read U.S. news, read British news, read even Al Jazeera does a really good job of collating what the events are over the course of the day. But here's RT. The Kremlin clarifies Putin's remarks on Ukraine. The other day he says he hasn't even really started anything yet. And so another article that I just didn't put in here, but I read and then just didn't add to this was like, is it bluster or does he really mean it? It looks more like bluster than anything else. Like he's lost a lot in this fight. Um, Putin talking about let them try. We haven't even really started anything yet. And now the clarification was the president simply reminded his audience that the military potentials of Ukraine and Russia were incommensurable. Now it's a 3-to-1 size fight. I mean, it's like you're fighting somebody that is much bigger and badder than you, which is why support from the West is important. Russian strength is so vast and only a small fraction of it is engaged in a special military operation. Western expectations that Ukraine can defeat Russia militarily are absurd and only add to the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Well, again, that perspective is if you're just prolonging what is inevitable, then that might be true. But if you can actually win, it's not. And then it concluded with this really interesting thing. Top Western officials have stated that Ukraine will be able to beat Russia on the battlefield with their help, and Moscow believes that Kyiv was pressured into its uncompromising position by Western backers. So behind all of this is the Western boogeyman of America, which, by the way, Putin here is he called America the Empire of Lies in his February 24th speech. So, and then they always end with the same thing. On February 20th, the Kremlin recognized Donbass and they demanded that Ukraine officially declare itself a neutral country. And of course, Kyiv insists that the Russian offensive was unprovoked. So that's like the guise of neutrality, but they keep beating that same drum. Okay. DPR, that is the Donetsk People's Republic. That's one of the provinces within Ukraine that the Kremlin says that it has recognized as an independent country. It borders Russia, and it's like the most pro-Russian there, but it's not all that pro-Russian anymore. There are some people trying to help it break away, and there's a lot of people like trying to get away and don't want to be in the middle of a war. Okay, at any rate, they captured these 3 British men, and then they were, saying that they're going to, a court ordered that they would be executed because they're mercenaries. They're not, but they're actually fighting legitimately for the Ukrainians, enlisted in the Ukrainians army. And so this is a breach of the rules of war. Lawmakers in the Donetsk People's Republic have lifted a moratorium on executions, because it used to be like they had rules against capital punishment. So, but they're changing the rules now in light of the need to protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Donetsk People's Republic. The ban on executions will be null and void. Okay, so they're changing the rules. Now, these fighters, these 3 guys, surrendered in Mariupol. Okay, they weren't they legitimately surrendered. They were legitimately fighting on the other side. So they should be, under the rules of war, conducted like as prisoners, not as mercenaries or criminals or whatever that they're saying that they are. And London insists that they should be treated that way under the Geneva Convention. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters for them. It also matters for us, because we have Americans that are there. The Americans asked if Russia to consider the Americans that were captured in the same kind of circumstances as combatants under the Geneva Convention. And then these American fighters are awaiting trial also in the next People's Republic, where 3 foreign fighters from UK and Morocco were handed death sentences just recently. So that's why it matters. I mean, it already mattered for the Brits, right? I mean, it already mattered for the rules of the international rules that govern civilization. But that's why it matters particularly to the American mind as well. Okay, Russia announces harsh response to Lithuania and EU to Kaliningrad blockade. So if you're not following the story, if you look on a world map, this is Russia over here, and Belarus, and Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. This little patch here is also part of Russia, and it's a holdover from World War II, where after World War II, the people reshaping the map said, okay, Lithuania, do you want this? Well, there's no Lithuanians here. We don't want it. Poland, do you want it? It was part of Germany. Like, Germany extended all the way through here, through part of Poland, up into this. This was actually the area that Prince Albert came from. Prince Albert, Victoria and Albert. Okay, and so they didn't want it. The Poles didn't want it. And so Russia was like, okay, this will be an extension of Russia now as part of the spoils of war. So the Lithuanians said, sorry, you guys over here in Kaliningrad, you can't actually use our rail, to transport your stuff through over to Russia or into Belarus. And Poland's not going to do that. So there's this little patch called the Suwalki Gap that's right here, just between Russia and Belarus, that the Russians and Belarusians have actually war gamed in 2017 and 2021 of if they needed to take that real estate for some reason. So they've already like simulated this. And so since Lithuania has cut them off from transporting their stuff because of the sanctions, this can get really bad. Now, they can go through the Black Sea over here to St. Petersburg as long as there's not ice here, but the Russians are mad as hornets about that. Okay, so let me get back to the story. Here's Russia to announce harsh response to Lithuania and EU due to Kaliningrad blockade. This is Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, who threatened that the Russian side would not wait indefinitely for them to reopen this corridor. Measures have already been prepared if the situation does not stabilize. Like I said, 2017 and 2021, they have war gamed this. They have simulated this with the Belarusians. We hope that the only correct decision will be made in Brussels. In Vilnius, Brussels is the head of the EU. Vilnius is the capital of Lithuania, which will ensure that unhindered transit to the exclave part of Russia. Okay, so that's what she's saying. Now, why does that matter? There's this little place called, and if you go back into my previous videos on here, a little place called the Suwalki Gap. Okay, if you watch this, I explain all the background, and it's well worth spending your time on. I would highly recommend it. Okay. Next issue, Zelensky was talking about refusal to accept Ukraine in NATO was a historic mistake. After the NATO meeting, they came out with this like tepid response. They said we totally support Ukraine, and right now the goal is to win. After that, we'll think about we'll turn our attention to membership in NATO. But the big issue right now is winning the war. And yeah, I was looking at that like there's something you're not saying. So Zelensky noted that the whole world is helping Ukraine, and that if they used to say like, well, if Ukraine is in NATO, Russia will attack. Well, yeah, and he said, well, we're not in NATO, and Russia has attacked. So I mean, that's not a problem anymore. That's no longer an issue. And he concludes by saying, for Ukraine, they found reasons why we should not be there, and Sweden and Finland were accepted. The decision is correct, and he's fine with that. With regard to Ukraine, the decision is historically erroneous, and I can't help but feel like if I was him, I'd feel exactly the same way. Okay, an article in Pravda. Here we're talking about, we're switching gears now and talking about what happened at the G20. The G20 is is an economic meeting of the world's largest producing countries. So these 20 countries produce like 80% of the world's gross domestic product, like 80% of the world's stuff. Okay, so there was no ministerial photo. Now, this is Pravda reporting, but they're reporting legit facts. No ministerial photo at the G27. U.S. and other foreign ministries or ministers refused to stand next to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Okay, he's kind of a pariah, and because of what Russia's doing. Japanese Foreign Minister Hayashi even refused to come to the welcome dinner in protest. So that's just part one. Here's The Guardian. I generally trust what The Guardian has to say in their reporting. This is a British newspaper. The Russian foreign minister left the G20 meeting of leading economies after telling his counterparts Russia's invasion of Ukraine was not responsible for a global hunger crisis, and that sanctions were designed to isolate Russia were amounted to a declaration of war. Okay, sanctions are a step before war. That's part one. They were responsible for a global hunger crisis. I mean, it's undoubted by almost everyone outside of Russia that yes, that's going on. That's what's happening. Lavrov said if the West doesn't want talks to take place, but wishes for Ukraine to defeat Russia on the battlefield because both views have been expressed, then perhaps there's nothing to talk about with the West. Well, you kind of knew what their position was before you got there. And it goes on. He said Ukraine should end the blockade of its ports, demine them, and ensure passage through the minefields. Here we're talking about food transports. Okay, but your battleships are there, and your ships are used to shoot missiles into Ukraine. So it's not like they can do that. They have to keep you at a distance so you don't bomb their cities into oblivion like you did with Mariupol. So you can't just be one-sided. Okay, so that's what's going on there. There's another one about what's going on. The West is artificially blocking Russian grain exports, said Lavrov. Okay, now he's just outright lying. And Lavrov does lie a lot. I mean, if you look at his statements, he lies again and again, and you can empirically prove it. Okay, statistics clearly show that the grain locked in Ukrainian ports represents less than 1% of the world's production. So it has no real impact on food security. Okay. He might be telling the technical truth about grain locked in ports, but Ukrainian grain amounts to about 15% of world supply of like wheat and corn and other things along those lines. So he's not really telling the truth as much as he might be telling the truth about locked in the ports as opposed to just Ukrainian grain trying to get out. All that is required is for the West to stop artificially blocking our supplies to those countries that have ordered our grain. Okay, really? Okay, just stop. Well, what's going on? The global grain market has been badly affected by the disruptions of exports from Russia. It's really, the problem is that we're under sanctions, so we can't get our stuff out. Now, there are no restrictions on their wheat and corn and other foodstuffs. There might be some restrictions on their shipping, and that might actually legitimately be a problem. But yeah, I mean, he's only telling half the story here. Okay. Zelensky gave this interesting speech to the African Union the other day. So this is also a Pravda article. So again, take Pravda with a grain of salt. But he's trying to explain to the African Union, like, millions of people are going to face food insecurity because of what's going on in Ukraine. Help us end this so we can be done with it and you can have food, right? And so there's this article here, Owie Lakimfa, former Secretary General of the African Workers Union, wrote an article. He's a Nigerian in a Nigerian newspaper. And he's not happy with Zelensky. And so Pravda is reporting somebody who really kind of hates Zelensky. Africa resources were seized to fund a war which, like the first, was essentially an all-European war in which the rest of humanity was forced to take sides. Hey, he's actually right about that. He's comparing this to World War II and, how Africa's being dragged into this. Today, 77 years later, Europe and its American cousin use propaganda, human rights claims, and threats to outright blackmail and drag Africa into yet another European conflict. Okay, I'm not exactly sure about the propaganda, human rights claims. Like, there are legitimate human rights violations here. And is Africa being dragged into it? Unfortunately, they are. But he's placing the blame at Zelensky's feet. Like, wait, he's the guy that's been invaded. It's like blaming the mugger for being mugged. Okay, so 51 African countries ignore Zelensky. He goes on and says, imbued with a sense of self-importance, Ukraine's impudent President Volodymyr Zelensky on June 20th called African presidents to a virtual meeting. And despite pressure from French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, only 3 African presidents attended the meeting. Okay, and all 3 of these were former French colonies, and that's why they went, because of the pressure from French President Emmanuel Macron. Okay. And so the Africans were snubbing you. They didn't want to come. Zelensky showed himself a civil warmonger. He did not seek peace, but took the side of one of the parties of the conflict and unreasonably declared Russia an enemy. Okay. If you are invaded by a foreigner who is killing your people, you can rightly declare them an enemy. I'll stand by you if that happens to you. Okay, that's kind of a fair thing to call somebody who invades your country and starts killing and bombing and whatever, and call them an enemy, and to not seek peace until that's done and they are not coming to fight you again. Okay, Zelensky and his masters in Washington and Brussels are only interested in sending more arms to Ukraine, which keeps the Western war industrial complex busy and profitable, and where they can test their new weapons. Look, if Russia hadn't invaded, this would not be an issue. This all comes down to Russia invading. That's what's going on. And he goes on, and this is how he completes his. So this is clearly a mean-spirited editorial commentary. It's not anything really factual, but Pravda is proclaiming it as if this is how the whole world's seeing it. Hopping around in green t-shirt and camouflage trousers, making endless speeches, he lives under the illusion that he is the great war president destined to defeat Russia and rescue the world from a bloodthirsty dragon and its evil empire. Zelensky is like a man who sets his home on fire, refuses for the fire to be put out, and then shouts that it is a universal calamity for which he deserves a mansion as a replacement. Wait, he didn't set his house on fire. The Russians came in and started destroying stuff. Okay, we Africans cannot be hoodwinked by such a freak. We have no inheritance in the house of Zelensky. Okay, so this was worse than not being written, this article, and Pravda carries it. Okay, next. Accusations of Nazism. There was a fascinating article in the New York Times about a week ago that showed that claims that the Ukrainians were Nazis were at like 0,000, and then just before the war started, it shot up to thousands of claims, like almost overnight, because that's what Putin started saying. It was, we got to rid the Ukrainians of neo-Nazi nationalists. Okay. Accusations of Nazism, which at the same time looked like a joke. He said, when I hear this from Russia, there are 2 feelings. The first is anger because of this injustice. Then comes a second feeling. I find what they say funny. It looks like a joke, like a caricature. Zelensky's Jewish. I mean, they're not Nazis. Okay. Next, the enemy has lost. This is a Interfax Ukraine, which is reasonably accurate as far, it seems reasonably trustworthy. The enemy has lost 250 of its military personnel over the past day. Total combat losses of the enemy, this is why I'm showing this, from February 24th to July 8th is approximately 36,900. Now, the reason that I'm talking about that is that's 36,900 dead Russians. How did they calculate that? Well, I think what they're doing is they're including all the LPR and DPR, that's the militia from the Luhansk and Donetsk that are fighting with Russia against, and conscripts and militants for not just Russians. And so anybody, and like when they were trying to seize Mariupol, it was bad. When they were trying to seize Severodonetsk, it was like a meat grinder for the Russians that were just being thrown into this battle. And so I think the numbers are probably a little inflated, but they may have ground truth. They may be right. It's probably a little inflated. I think the American and British estimates would be something north of 20,000 and change at this point. Maybe even approaching 30,000, but I think that 36,900 is a little high, but this is what the Ukrainians believe at this point. Okay, next article. HIMARS sends more advanced rocket systems to the Ukraine to slow the further Russian advance. If only these were here earlier. Now, the United States sent 4 of these bad boys. Now, these things can shoot a rocket 50 miles. And so you can stay pretty far back and safely in your territory and actually knock out your enemy. And what they had before could go about 20 miles, something like that. And so this really extends their reach. Okay, the U.S. weapons package announced July 8th will include 4 high-mobility rocket systems, bringing the total to 12. They only sent 4 at first, and it took like 3 weeks to train them on this. But it's really important that they have these systems, because with these systems, see, here's what can happen. Here's a deep state map. I'm going to click on this little button in the lower left-hand corner, and when I do, what you'll see is that all the rockets are shown. So you see, like, there's no, like, these have to be HIMARS. These hits like out here, these are, oops, I'm sorry. When you look deep into Russian territory and you see these things being hit, you're seeing these are from HIMARS. They have to be. There's no other way that they can hit this far. These things are right on the edge. These are regular, shells, whatever. But these are being hit by. And so what they're actually doing is they're taking out command posts and munitions dumps and things deep into Russian-held territory with the HIMARS. And so that's an important thing. Okay, this is the UK Ministry of Defense. There's a realistic possibility that Russia's immediate tactical objective will be Seversk as its forces attempt to advance towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. What are we talking about here? Okay, so let's pull back out on the deep state map again, and let's go back over to this area that has been, really engaged. I'm going to turn off the shelling, and you can see a little bit better. So if we go over to Lysychansk, which just fell, Severodonetsk. Okay, this fell about a week and a half ago, and Lysychansk fell last week. Okay, and then so the next big city, the next city in its way here is Seversk. Okay, but really what they're trying to get to is over here to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Okay, and when you look at the map, what you see is Seversk is like right in this pocket, and this right here, this road is kind of like what will become the new front line over time. And so this is probably in great danger and is about to fall. This is the Ukrainian lines, and so that's what's going on. Okay, next. So I like to hear what the Institute for the Study of War has to say daily. Luhansk Oblast administration head said that Russian forces are conducting an operational pause as of July 8th, but Haidai, the governor, is saying, hey, we're still getting shelled, regardless of whether there's an operational pause. The Russian military command, which announced the operational pause on July 7th, has recognized the need for a pause given the state of the forces, but they're also understanding that there's a danger in allowing the Ukrainians to seize the initiative if they don't do anything about that. But this last little bit was really important. Russian military bloggers, are continuing to show rhetorical opposition to the Kremlin by faulting Russian military defense, logistics making vulnerable to Ukrainian strikes. provided by U.S. HIMARS rocket systems. This is what I was just talking about here. The U.S. HIMARS are actually changing, how far they can hit onto the battlefield. Like, look at this. So this area back here, this big cluster, that's all HIMARS. I'm pretty sure. And I'm very sure that this is, because it's so far from the front line of the battlefield, that it has to be from HIMARS. Okay, so that's what they're talking about. All right, last thing, if you're still watching this, I just want you to understand the enormity of what's going on here. So this is a Radio Free Europe. Russian airstrikes leaves death and destruction. This is a man weeping over his dead wife on the battlefield. Like, they're just in the middle of a city, and rocket attacks have done this. His wife is dead, and this is the reality on the ground. So when we're talking about, like, hey, this well, what is this? They're just making stuff up. No, they're not making stuff up. Oh, well, they keep calling us an enemy. They're an enemy. They killed his wife. I mean, so that's the reality. That's what's going on here. Hey, I'm out of time. Thank you for your time. And please subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and tell others about it. I'm just trying to get the word out as I update my book weekly. And thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me to spend some time with you.
Hey, if this video was helpful, hit like to help others find it in YouTube's algorithm. Subscribe so that you can stay informed. And one more thing, if you are moved to contribute to the humanitarian aid for Ukraine, I have a link below for Samaritan's Purse. If you want to give, be sure to give only to reputable organizations. There's a lot of scammers out there. Thanks for your time.